Uh, so we are live. We can start.
Good evening. Indian Law Institute Kerala State Unit has been conducting online lectures by experts on topics of contemporary relevance to law and the legal system. Topic for the online lecture today is Ethics of Law, Science and Institutions. The lecture will be rendered by Shri Arun Maira, former member of Planning Commission of India. Now moving on to the program, I invite Justice Alexander Thomas to deliver the welcome and introductory speech. Sir.
Good evening and a warm welcome to all those who are attending today's online lecture program. Let me in particular welcome the Honorable Sri Justice S. Mani Kumar, the Honorable Chief Justice of the Kerala High Court, Honorable Sri Justice A.K. Jayashankaran Nambiar, Judge of this court who is rendering special address today, all my sister and brother judges of this court, Sri Arun Maira, the eminent speaker in today's online lecture, members of the Executive Council of the Indian Law Institute Kerala State Unit, President, Executive Committee members and members of the Kerala High Court Advocates Association, the Kerala High Court Advocates Senior Advocates Association, the Kerala State Unit of the Indian Federation of Women Lawyers, and all officers of the law officers of the union and state governments, all members of the bar, the judicial officers, and all others who are attending today's online lecture. My task today is to give a brief introduction about Sri Arun Maira, who is the eminent speaker for today's online lecture. We are privileged and honored that Sri Maira, in spite of his busy schedules, both at the national and international level, has graciously consented to accept our invitation to render today's lecture program. Sri Arun Maira was born in Lahore, in the erstwhile part of the state of Punjab, on the 15th of August of the year 1943, which was then in the midst of the Quit India movement in the country. He has been a top-level management consultant, and he was part and parcel of the Tata Administrative Services for more than 2.5 long decades, and has held various positions in the Tata Group till the late 1980s. He was the former chairman of the Boston Consulting Group in India for about 8 years, since 2000, and he has also very eminently served his country, and his focus in his capacity as member of the Planning Commission of India for about 5 years from 2009 was related to industrialization and urbanization. He was the leader of the Global Organization Practice and the managing director of the Innovation Associates, which is a subsidiary of Arthur D. Little, for about 10 years. He has authored various books including Remaking of India, One Country, One Destiny, Discordant Democrats, Transforming Capitalism, Redesigning the Aeroplane While Flying, Reforming Institutions, Listening for Well-Being, etc., etc. In the COVID-19 pandemic times, he has authored two very good books, namely A Billion Fireflies and Transforming Systems, Why the World Needs a New Ethical Toolkit. In A Billion Fireflies, he says that COVID-19 pandemic has revealed the fragility of the economic systems and the precariousness of the incomes and the lives of people all over the world, and that we must build back better and create a more resilient economy, which is more inclusive and more just than our economies are. In that book, he has reminded us of the ideas of a new paradigm, of what it should be and how it can be brought about, and that the time has come to convert those ideals and ideas into reality. In his latest book, Transforming Systems, Why the World Needs a New Ethical Toolkit, Sri Arun Maira reminds us that while economies have been growing by the turn of this millennium, systemic problems of social inequality and environmental unsustainability are becoming intolerable, that a new toolkit is required to attain a new ethical perspective for the world that goes beyond the precepts of good business management and prevalent best practices in government as well as civil society organizations. He stresses that the new ethical toolkit for the world has to be founded on the disciplines of systems thinking, ethical reasoning, deep listening, and that we have to focus more on the concepts of governance of networks rather than the management of organizations. He emphasizes that the diverse points of view must be heard and valued, not smothered beneath the technology-driven quantitative and data analysis. With his wealth of knowledge and experience, he would highlight the uncertainty of a future that is bound to change dynamically and points out how we can cope with the changes. He insists that the most useful life skill for young people is to learn how to be lifelong learners, sensitive to their own evolution within an evolving system. It is very surprising that if one reads the books of Sri Arun Maira, we would be tempted to make a guess that his academic disciplines could be in the field of business management, social sciences, economics, and even philosophy for that matter. I'm sure all of you would be rather surprised that he is a master's degree holder in physics from St. Stephen's College, Delhi University. Those who are interested may refer to one of his recent open articles published in the Hindu on 19th of October 2021, titled Oversimplified Models, Complex Social Systems, wherein he deals with the fundamental epistemic limitations and ethical weakness of Western scientific methods. He compares the discipline of physics in science with the discipline of economics and social sciences and reminds us that the time has come for more equity in global governance and for an Eastern philosophical way of thinking to save the world from a scientific apocalypse. I think I may not be far of the mark in assessing that people like Shri Arun Maira are public intellectuals trying to resow the seeds of the pioneering economists of the late 1960s and the early 70s, like the German origin UK settled economist, late E.F. Schumacher, the author of the celebrated book Small is Beautiful, who propounded the ideas of alternate Buddhist economics. The foreword of Sri Maira's book, Listening for Well-Being, has been written by His Holiness Dalai Lama. I will not stand anymore between you and our eminent speaker for the day, Sri Arun Maira. With these few words, let me also once again welcome Sri Arun Maira for entering today's online lecture and also express the heartfelt gratitude of the Indian Law Institute, Kerala State Unit, as well as the members of the bench and the bar of the Kerala High Court for having graciously accepted our invitation to render today's online lecture. May I conclude by saying that Sri Arun Maira is truly a public intellectual par excellence who transcends and intersects interdisciplinary barriers and binaries, and is indeed an Acharya of our times. With these words, let me wind up.
Thank you very much, sir. Now I invite Justice Jayashankaran Nambiar to render the special address.
Thank you, Shyam. Thank you, Justice Alexander, for those warm words of welcome. Welcome to all the participants today on this virtual platform. In a world where ethics and morality are often seen as intertwined, it was Sir Bernard Williams, the famous English moral philosopher, who proposed a distinction between morality and ethics. Morality, according to him, dealt with the choice to obey or disobey commands and prescriptions. Basically, the choice or the decision to do good or evil. Ethics, on the other hand, he said, was concerned with how one would direct one's life in accordance with certain principles through the practice of inquiry, reflection, and self-conduct. Ethics, therefore, was a much broader concept than morality itself. In a pluralistic society like ours, while we may all have some shared understanding of what amounts to ethical conduct, there are innumerable circumstances, and none of you are alien to that, when the understanding is challenged. We often encounter these situations in our courts, and while we as judges have often to decide on those issues, many of you as lawyers will understand or will surely acknowledge that you sometimes have to argue cases against your own convictions. Now, what is ethics in law? According to me, ethics in law requires everyone associated with the law to reflect upon our laws and analyze the efficacy of our laws as a tool of governance of our people. Now, as you all know, our constitution vests the governance of our people with the state. And the state in this context does not refer merely to the triumvirate or the troika of executive, legislature, and judiciary, but is basically a reference to all the other functionaries mentioned in the Constitution, such as the Election Commission or the Comptroller Auditor General, the Attorney General, etc., all of whom occupy positions of trust, because as functionaries under the Constitution, they occupy their positions of trust to be exercised, and the roles and the duties to be exercised by them are always with the for the benefit of the people, of we the people of India. Now, we've often heard the word constitutional morality mentioned in many of the judgments of the Supreme Court, and also in the regular discourse on national affairs. What do we actually mean when we speak of a constitutional morality? We refer to ethical and moral principles that must really inform us in the interpretation of the written text of the Constitution and in the interpretation of the precepts of our Constitution. As lawyers and judges, we all have a very important role to play in that regard. And the question that we need to constantly ask ourselves while we go about our tasks is, are we really doing our bit? Now we have with us, as Justice Alexander introduced, a very eminent person in Mr. Maira, who will, in the course of the next hour, share with all of us his experiences and his views on the subject. So, without much ado and without wasting more time, let me hand over the stage to Mr. Maira. Over to you, Mr. Maira.
Thank you, Justice Jayashankaran Nambiar. That speech sets the ground perfectly well for Mr. Arun Maira to address us on the topic. Let us now hear Mr. Arun Maira. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ram. I'm feeling highly honored and intimidated to be in the presence of the Honorable Chief Justice of the Court and the Justices of the Kerala High Court and all the members of the Law Association who are gathered here to listen to me. It's a great honor, and thank you very much for inviting me to share my thoughts with you. Thank you for your very sharp introduction, a very clear introduction, Justice Thomas. And Justice Jayashankar, it's like the gong in a temple, a Buddhist temple. You ring the gong and it makes you think and reflect. And what you said just in just a few minutes is making me think. Yes, the matter is about our role, all of us. I'm talking about myself, but certainly we are talking here today about what should be the roles of people who work in the system of justice in the world, and particularly at this time in our country. Now, as has been explained already, I studied physics and I've done various things in business and management and public policy. I never studied law, and of course, I've never practiced law formally. Yet, my wife says that I'm a lawyer. And she says this because she gets upset with me when we are having a discussion about some matter and I explain what sort of matters. And she says, you are like a lawyer. You never lose an argument. You are coldly rational and logical. That's good. But then the occasions on when we have these discussions which upset her is when she is having a difficulty with, it could be somebody that she is buying something from or domestic help. And she's upset with the person or the situation. And I try and understand the other person's point of view and explain it to her. And she then asks this question, whose side are you on? You see? And that's what we must discuss. Whose side are we on when we exercise our professional skills? The Chief Justice of India, Justice N.V. Ramana, in the convocation address that he gave at the National Law University in Delhi on the 9th of this month, just a few days ago, said some very profound things to the students entering law. In fact, I wonder why I am invited by you to share my thoughts when the Chief Justice has said what he can say with so much more authority than I can. However, I want to share the perspective of someone who's outside the system of law. And if my ideas resonate with yours, I'm very happy that we are on the same side. He said, the legal profession is not about profit maximization. Beware, he said, of prevailing inequities and ask yourselves, can I be a part of the solution? Particularly in a country like India, you need to be, he was talking to law students, you need to be social architects. It is for you to shape the future of this country. The opinions you write, the policies you draft, the pleadings and submissions that you file, and the ethics that you hold dear will have a far-reaching effect. We are living in a world which is greatly disordered at the moment. It's greatly disordered. Poverty around the world has shown itself up again. after this COVID pandemic, which stopped economies, and those who were just clinging on to the economies as they were growing were they dropped off. And then we suddenly became aware that there were people who were supposedly with us in the growing economy, but they were hardly able to hold on. And as soon as the bus stopped, they were knocked off, they fell off, and they were down on the roads in India, the migrants just walking miles and miles, searching for some safe place to be, some place where they might get a little food and water, because they weren't getting it where they were working, building the buildings we live in, working in the factories that produce what we want. We didn't realize how they were living, how they were being treated by the pattern of growth of our economy. And we have the condition of the environment, which is deteriorating all over the world, and we are becoming conscious of it at long last. And so the alarms about climate change. We have the social media, which is not helping the solutions, providing solutions at all. It's aggravating problems. It's enabling hate to be spread. It is causing disagreements. It is preventing harmony. It is provoking violence. And so the world is greatly disordered at this time. We do need, as Justice Anambia just said, ethics in the laws themselves, and we must reflect on what our laws are. And in the very big picture, let me say, for example, we do need to form new laws for the management of social media, the internet, and information and data generally. New laws. We need new laws which will enable us to manage the condition of our environment and to prevent further deterioration in it. We do need new laws in international trade. The WTO has, to my mind, and I would say thankfully so, collapsed. It needs to reform itself on the basis of a new just system. We need new laws for intellectual property very clearly. The situation of vaccines at the moment, and who they are being made available to, and who they're not being made available to, are pointing out the inequity that's arisen from this system of protecting intellectual property, and preventing those who have the intellectual property from, or not preventing, but preventing others from demanding that those who own the intellectual property should make it justly available for the benefit of everybody in the world. So we need new laws based on new ethics, or the right ethics, to shape the world and to make it more just and more orderly again. I want to explain the complex problems that are happening in the world and that have been happening actually for a century now, but have become so fragile. They made the world so fragile today with two images. One is the image of an earthquake, and the other is an image of a perfect storm. An earthquake. An earthquake reveals the fragility in the buildings in which you live, the buildings that you've constructed in which you feel very comfortable. When there's a rumbling in the earth, the weaknesses in the structures in which you have been living get shown up. So that's a very good image to use to explain the weaknesses in the institutions of the world. And I'm going to use the images from a book written by Thomas Friedman, a famous journalist and a very well-known author whose books have been selling in millions in the last few years. He had written a book before he wrote the book, The Earth is Flat, which made him very famous, more famous a few years ago. Before that, he'd written a book called The Lexus and the Olive Tree. And this was a book that he wrote about the conditions in the Middle East, and from there generalized about the institutional dilemmas in the world. And he used the image of the Lexus car, the Japanese sophisticated luxury car, to say that everybody wants a Lexus. I mean, that was in his mind, the image of what people want. It's, luxury, and everybody in the world, whether in America or Japan or in the Middle East, would like to have the luxury car. That's the Lexus. And he said, this is good, you see. Globalizations enable people to have access to whatever they want, wherever it's produced in the world. What is the other image that he put into the book was that of the olive tree. And he said the olive tree, which a lot of olive trees grow in the Middle East, they have very deep roots, deep in the soil, and they live, hundreds of years. And they are very difficult to uproot, very difficult to uproot. And the olive tree, he said, is coming in the way of globalization. The olive tree meaning the people in the Middle East fighting for their identities. That this is who we are, these are our traditions, our cultures, our religions, and standing up for themselves. And the globalization world was saying to them that you need to be changed because you're coming in the way of making the world a better world for everyone. So we have on the top, coming back to the image of the earthquake, where on the top layer, there's global trade, which is finance and data, which is flowing freely everywhere. It's rootless. It doesn't feel it belongs anywhere. It goes everywhere. And beneath the ground, are the roots, like the roots of the olive tree, which are very deep. Their histories of people, deep roots, their identities and their cultures, and their historical injustices that they feel. In between this layer on the top, which is sort of flowing faster, and beneath this layer, the deep roots, which Friedman said need to be uprooted, are governments. And the governments within the boundaries of a country, like in our country, India, have to contend with both the forces coming in from around to our country, and which we welcome, perhaps with finance and trade and ideas, and we want to open our boundaries to those. And within the country, there are people with very deep roots and different histories also. As we said, different cultural histories, different languages, different religions, and they don't want to be smothered and made one. They would like to be respected for who they are. And so our government in the middle is contending with rumblings from below, conflicts in below, and then this whole wave trying to smother what's happening in the country and within. And they have to, they are in that layer which is feeling like when you talk of tectonics, there are 3 layers or 4 layers, and it's the layer in between which has the fault lines in it. And so governments are living on the fault lines. They exist as institutions on the fault lines of the global social system. They are required to be just and fair to whom? Well, to the people who say that you are our government, whether it's elected or not, you are our government. So they are responsible to people within the boundaries of the country. However, like Friedman was saying, the government should, forget about their own people and their desires and their identities and their concerns, and just respect the requirements of people who are coming from outside and say, give us freedom to flow around in your country. And it's becoming very hard, has been very hard for governments to manage in this situation. So I'm switching now to the other image of a storm, which is many wind systems when they come together from different sides. They create tornadoes, they create storms, which can uproot everything that they pass over. The world is at this moment going through a storm in which there are, if I could say, four big forces that are coming at us from all sides. The first of them are these invisible threats that are in our cyberspace. We don't even know now anymore where the threat is coming from. It could be a bug in our information systems. It could be a drone that drops in unexpectedly. This is alarming. This force has to be understood, and we've got to be able to manage it. The second is below, the crumbling of the planet, the rumblings of the physical earth, the environmental systems, which are shaking us up. And this is creating a change which has to be understood and managed too. Then there are two other forces which are institutional forces. One of them coming, I'm using my hand from the right, coming to us from the right, a big wind system which has been around for centuries, is the system of property rights and capitalism. The other one coming from the left is a more recent one. It's probably just 100, 150 years old, gathering steam, is the force of human rights, the understanding that human beings have rights. And those rights are not merely property rights. They have a right to exist, a right to respect. That's what they also need. So these two opposing forces are one I'm going to concentrate on just now. The force of property rights, which is a large part of laws all over the world, the protection of people's property rights. And I will come to speak about the great lawyer of India, one of the great lawyers of India, Nani Palkhiwala, and his cases that he fought in the Supreme Court and won, reminding us about the fundamental rights of people and what is enshrined in our own constitution. Now, these rights of property and capital must be protected. At the same time, now we are recognizing that the law must also be used, framed and used, to protect the rights of those who have no property, who just have their life. What are their rights and how should they be protected while protecting the rights of those who have property? In the early 1990s, just after the fall of the Berlin Wall, the Soviet Union collapsed. When the Soviet Union collapsed, the great economist, political economist, social scientist, Francis Fukuyama wrote a book called The End of History, and in which he said the history of ideological evolution has ended because, he said, the force of capitalism and the force of the idea of electoral political democracy, the two ideas that the West represented and fought for, had finally won over the opposing forces, which was the force of socialism, which the Soviet Union represented, as well as the force of single party governance, which again the Soviet Union represented and China does. So he said with the collapse of the Soviet Union, of course, at that time, China wasn't much in the picture. It was as if anybody who believed in that idea and had grown with that idea, those two ideas, that was the end of it. And there was therefore no more opposition to the ideas of capitalism and free property rights, and the idea that it's only by electoral democracies and multi-party democracies that the world can be governed. So as I pointed out already, that the idea of capitalism is founded on a fundamental principle of rights, which are property rights. And the idea of democracy is founded on a fundamental principle of human rights. In capitalism, it is fair and just in the governance if those who own more have a greater say in how the system is governed. And thus, in Europe, starting with earlier the England and then coming into France and Sweden, the governance of the country was in the hands of those who owned more land. They were entitled to decide in some assemblies what would be the rules governing the kingdom, which the king would listen to and pass decrees. But these were democracies. And then came the desire that these people themselves should be elected. Then who would elect them? Once again, the criteria was based on how much people owned. It's only if you owned enough would you have the right to vote. So the principle in capitalism is that ownership of property gives you rights, and the more that you own of a place, the greater right you have in determining how the place should be run. So in a company, those who own more shares must have, is just and fair. They own more of it, they've invested more in it. they should have a greater say in how the company is run and for what purpose it is being run. In democracy, it says even if a person doesn't own anything, not even a piece of clothing on himself, he has the same right to determine how the system is to be governed as the person who owns a billion-dollar home and a fortune worth, 30, 40 billion dollars. They're both equal citizens and both have an equal right. Now, these are very different principles. They're very different principles. And these are the principles that have to be reconciled in the design of the governance of institutions in the world today. Institutions at various levels. The institutions of countries, like I've just been talking about, and the institutions of the international governance. It is very clear that the rich countries and the more powerful countries who won the war have been determining what the rules are for governing the trade, for governing the flows of finance, for determining who are the wicked countries and whose leaders could be taken to the International Court of Justice and who not. So there are a few people in the Security Council, and some amongst them within the Security Council can even break the rules of the Security Council, but because they own more, they're the wealthiest. That's the way it's working. And this is not just to all the countries. And within countries, talking of economic institutions, we have, like I just said, limited liability companies, which are run on this principle that those who invest more in the company have a greater say, just even have a greater say in how the company should be governed and how its surpluses should be distributed. Now, limited liability companies, let me stay now with the subject I know rather well, are legal fictions. They are given an identity under the law, and they are a citizen of the society. They have the laws of common citizens, the rights of common citizens, which is the right for protection of their property, the right to sue other citizens, the right to free speech, which every common citizen has, except that these corporations' resources are so much larger than the resources of individual citizens. They can hire the best lawyers to fight cases for them in courts against poor people who have no money to hire a good lawyer to defend their case. So when you talk about defending the rights of people, those who are richer, much richer, get much better support in fighting for their rights than those who can't pay anything. So to the question that Justice Jaishankar mentioned, we have to make choices about who we represent and why. And that's the ethical choices, ethical dilemmas that all professionals face. And I say lawyers must be facing the same too, as the Chief Justice of India has said. Now, property rights, the idea of property rights is become very pervasive. It says that in economics, that unless people own something, they won't care for it adequately and they won't use it efficiently. So therefore, this whole concept of the tragedy of the commons, which became a sort of central principle in the design of economic management institutions in the last century, was founded on Hardin's theory of the tragedy of the commons, in which it said that something that belongs to everybody will not be well governed. And therefore, the rights to land on which people are using the common land for grazing their cows and things is not good. That land should be made the property of somebody, a corporation or an individual, who will then make sure that land is kept well and used efficiently. But the question is, who will have access to the use of that land? And similarly, at least in the Western countries, it's even more so than here, the access to river water, the access to the seashores. If you own more, you can have access to that too, and then you can prevent others from using it. And of course, earlier, human bodies, it was okay to convert them into property as slaves and to use them as assets, as property in an economic machine, and they belong to the owner of the business, the economic business. And so this has been the pattern that it's okay to convert things and human beings into private property because that's good somehow for the growth of the economies overall. And today, knowledge is also being converted into private property and patented. And so then people own it, it's their right to determine what it'll be used for and how much they will charge in case they would want to allow someone to use it. So it's become that those who own knowledge, previously it was owning human beings also, but hopefully that has disappeared. And of course, it still remains that you must own the land. And if you own the land, you have a right to how it's used, and the forest and the water and the environment around ourselves. So this principle of property rights, I just lay now aside and come down to ethical principles. In all religions, it says that you must care for others and not for yourself. The purpose of your life is not to make more of yourself. The purpose of your life is to be a better person and to nourish the world around yourself. Every religion says this. In every spiritual tradition, certainly, in every religion, the spiritual tradition says just reflect on who you are and your small place in the universe. So it is a call again and again through the centuries and all around the world to us human beings to consider how good we are and not how much we have, which, as you can see, is the contest between the principle of the capitalist economy, the property economy. It's by how much you have that you will be judged about how good you are, how important you are. Whereas in, if I could say, the natural system, the earth system, the human system, the natural system, it's not important how much you own. It is how good you are, how good you are. So economic wealth as a criterion for judging who is better and who is worse has pervaded our systems. Countries are judged by whether they're better countries with better values, by how large their GDP is. And a poor country cannot be having good ethical principles. And I mean, just to come to our situation, that India was being prevented from joining the nuclear club because America said that we can't trust, underdeveloped countries to own something as powerful as a nuclear device, because they might, they don't have the right ethics and morals, and they might use this device against harmless civilian people. But the only country that has ever used a nuclear bomb against a civilian population and used it deliberately, not accidentally, is the very country which says we can't let India have a nuclear bomb. And now Iran. So I'm raising these profound questions about who has the right to determine what is right. In sports today, too, it should be you play the game for the sake of the game. We admire those sportsmen who win more, and we know who wins more by how much money they have, how much wealth they have. So we recognize goodness through wealth, through wealth. It could be singers and film stars, the poorer guys, and they may be very good actors, and they choose the parts they play and the movies in which they will play them and play them very well. It's not for the money, it's for being a great professional. It's for discovering yourself, developing yourself, and that's the gift that you are giving to others. Money is mixed up with power, very clearly, with political power. It is now controlling knowledge and knowledge power and economic power, of course. And scientists, then people about knowledge, the questions that scientists have to ask themselves, and they today are not asking themselves this question sufficiently, is whose side are we on? For whose sake are we developing this science and this knowledge? If we are developing it for the people who pay us, the question to ask then is, what is their purpose? What are their intentions? Should I therefore be providing my knowledge to anybody, or must I not choose who I will provide my knowledge to? And I also have been feeling, I've been, as I said, in business, and I've been a consultant to business, and this question has been bothering me about what is the purpose of the business? And then, as a consultant, must I not consider the purpose of the business to whom I'm providing my great professional skill? What are they going to be doing with the great knowledge I provide them? It will make them better, but better at doing what? And here, again, returning to our Honorable Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, he cited Justice Chagla in his speech, and he said, he's talking of the great Justice Chagla of 70, 80 years ago. No, sorry, 60, 70 years ago, possibly. The legal profession, Justice Chagla says, is a great calling, and it is a learned and noble profession. Remember always that it is a profession. It is not a trade or a business. The distinction between the two is deep and fundamental. In business, your sole object is to make money. In the legal profession, making money is merely incidental. His quote ends. And talking then to the national law universities, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, present Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Justice Ramana said, I thought it would be relevant to highlight something that I find a little troubling. The primary objective behind the establishment of national law universities in the country was to improve the quality of legal education in the country to produce better trained legal professionals. However, no authoritative study has been conducted to determine whether this has taken place. Additionally, due to various considerations, most students from these universities end up in corporate law firms. And even though such law firms are an integral part of the legal landscape of the country, it is unfortunate that a comparable addition is not being made to the ranks of lawyers practicing in courts from the national law universities. This is perhaps one of the reasons why, he says, national law universities are perceived as elitist and detached from social realities. So I come back to us, each of us, and to myself, and to all those who are joining the most noble profession of the law. We have to ask ourselves, as the more powerful people of the world must ask themselves too, as they stand on their pedestals while their common people swarming around, and looking for ways to also get recognition and have an equal chance in the world. Powerful people must ask themselves, do we really know what is good for the people? Yeah. We as experts quite often say, we know what is good for those uneducated masses. We will devise good solutions like the new farm laws. We've got experts in agriculture, and we know, and this is going to be good for all the farmers. Their incomes are going to rise. And then farmers come out and say, no, you haven't even listened to us. We know where the shoe pinches. We could suggest to you changes to be made which will make the world better for us and fairer for us also. We do need that. Please listen to us. But they are put down to say they are obstructionists. They're preventing good laws and good governance. They're a nuisance, actually. The very people for whose sake you're doing something, how can they be a nuisance when they say they want to be listened to? As a good governance, you must be listening to the very people for whose sake you're doing something. Otherwise, how do you know what really matters to them? And do you have their insights of what changes, maybe small changes, if you were to make, would really help, rather than the big bang solutions that you come up with, demonetization and so on, which you think are good for the small people, but actually may harm them even more. So listening to the people is extremely necessary for any professional who says his role or her role is to make the world better for everyone, for others, and for everyone. We all have biases at the back of our minds. We can't help it. We are human beings. We grow up in a culture. We get ideas. We are educated with ideas, and they make us who we are. But we have to become aware of our biases. It's not a matter, again, of, as was said so well in the introduction by Justice Nambia, about good and evil. It is, but is it right? Is it right? And here, looking at the US Supreme Court right now, where they're revisiting this discussion around the right to life, where it's on the context of embryos, and no one, even the woman in whose body this embryo has grown by accident or through crime, has a right to kill that embryo, even if it's going to affect her physical life possibly, but then her dignity in life thereafter. She has no right over her life, but that embryo has a right to its life. And coming in science, since we're also talking about science, science is finding it hard to determine when exactly something has life in it. Because if one was to extend this, that without consciousness there can be life, then I would say, well, why not the tree? Well, why not any animal? And therefore we come to this Buddhist idea that they all have a right to live. They may not be able to speak yet to you in your language, but they have a right to live. And thus, maybe on that basis, you can say that even an embryo has a right to live. But then comes, whose side are you on? Because there is a real life, that of the woman, and there is this other life also. And a decision has to be made. Who has to be protected in this matter? And so there are eminent justices, and have been of that eminent court, who've taken different views on this matter. So the matter is still out to be determined through justice. Whose side are you on? Whose side are you on? New scorecards are required. I'm jumping now to solutions very quickly, if you don't mind, and then we'll discuss those. I think to change the institutions of the world and to have more justice in the institutions, to have more inclusion for everybody, the poor people also, in the process of governance and in the economy for them too, and also considering the condition of the environment on which the poorer people depend even more than the rich people. We can protect ourselves, as I'm doing, with different devices in my house to keep the pollution levels low inside, and humidifiers in the hot season to make sure that I'm comfortable, and air conditioners and so on. I mean, I can shut the environment around. The poorer people just have to live with the environment. They have to live with the waters of the river as they are. They can't be given bottled water or clean, purified water in their houses like I get. So the environment has to be protected for its own sake, and also for the sake of the most vulnerable people in the world. And how should we then change institutions? The first is we need new scorecards for all levels of institutions. Nations' scorecards cannot be just economic scorecards about the GDP. How the GDP is grown, what is happening while it's growing, must be measured also. Who gets included? Who is excluded? What is being damaged in terms of the environment and in terms of the lives of people? Should be measured also to judge whether the governance is good and whether it's a healthy system or not. So broader scorecards must be used. Within the country, states also must use broader scorecards, not just be rated on their state GDP growth. Companies cannot be any longer judged by how much profit they make or how much their stock prices have gone up. It's a very narrow, selfish economic indicator. This whole idea, which has grown too much in the last 50 years, that the business of business must be only business. And Milton Friedman, the other Friedman of the Chicago School, who got the Nobel Prize in Economics, advised Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan in the US, Margaret Thatcher in the UK, that that's the way to make the economy good. Let the invisible hand of Adam Smith take care of things. Everyone should rationally look after their own self-interest, including corporations, who, as I mentioned, are so huge. When they start rationally looking after their self-interest, my goodness, the amount of resource that they can use to protect their interest against those of others, they just trample over the earth. They just trample over the earth. And so corporations also must be judged. Their goodness must be judged by how much good or harm they're causing the environment, how much good or harm they're causing to the poorest people in the world, and not how much benefit they're creating for their investors. So with this, I will come to my debate with the great Mr. Nani Palkhiwala. I was a director on the board of Tata Motors. It was called Telco at the time. And we were creating these new Indian enterprises in Pune, Pimpri Chinchwad, for Indians, young Indians, to learn to design and make vehicles in India, and with those designs and produce Indian-made vehicles for India as well as for the world. Why were we in this position that we had to do it ourselves? Because we'd come to the point that we didn't have enough money in our country to buy foreign technology, to hire foreign consultants and people to come and teach us how to do it. We'd done it before in the early 1950s and 60s when we had joint ventures, and my company had a joint venture with the best vehicle company in the world, that is Daimler-Benz, the Mercedes-Benz, and they taught us very well for 10 years in Jamshedpur how to run an automobile plant. And we were producing trucks and buses, and in a competitive situation with 4 other manufacturers in India, we had acquired fairly, at the lowest prices, 70% of the Indian market. And we were already, while Daimler-Benz was with us, seeing that our vehicles made 99% in India were taken by Daimler-Benz, and they put a star on it and exported them to Sri Lanka and to Malaysia and to the Middle East as Daimler-Benz vehicles, because in the global supply chain, it was more economical for them to ship a vehicle from India to these neighboring countries than all the way from Europe. So our vehicles, made 99% in India by Indians, were the same quality as Daimler-Benz vehicles. They said so. But now India came by the mid-60s to the point our foreign exchanges had run out. We couldn't continue to pay royalties to our partners, and we couldn't get fresh technology, fresh help to learn how to design the vehicles, which Daimler-Benz had not taught us. They had brought the designs to us and taught us how to make the vehicles. But now we'd have to design them ourselves because no one's going to give us the designs. They're all patented by people elsewhere. And worse still, we couldn't import the machinery to convert our designs to actual products, whereas in Jamshedpur, the machinery had been imported from Europe and America because we had the foreign exchange to buy it. So even the machines we had to learn how to design and build. So here was a tremendous need to learn, to do things we'd never done before. And the spirit of the workers in these factories was the main thing, because they were giving their time 6 days a week, 10, 12 hours a day. They were giving their lives to build India, to build what Indians needed, and learning rapidly and sweating and making mistakes and learning and producing it. Now, we were, as a company, like all companies, you run into economic bad times, and this industry goes through cycles. So we were in a cycle where sales of vehicles, everybody's vehicles were down, and so the company has a financial problem. At the end of the year, when the accounts are closed, you have to determine that after you have paid whoever needs to be paid, your suppliers and the workers, their wages, the surpluses, you can, as a board, determine who they will be used for. One is, well, to your investors, you can give them their dividends. And the other is, if you feel like, you could give a bonus to the workers for having done a good job. So there are 2 discretionary decisions that you can make as a board on what to do with this little surplus that you might have. And the board decided, and Nani Palkhiwala is the deputy chairman of our board, Sumit Mulkanko was the chairman, and Nani Palkhiwala, being an eminent lawyer as well as a great man in finance, managed, if you will, or guided our finance and legal matters. So in these sort of decisions in the board, his views were the views. And the board, I just joined the board, and so I got the papers first time of what the board was proposing to decide. And I saw there, to my horror, that the board was proposing a decision to be taken that they would continue paying the dividends to the investors, but would not pay the bonus that we had been paying to our workers. And I thought this was unfair. I felt that when times were hard, yes, people who are the stakeholders must make some sacrifice. And the investors, therefore, should not get their dividend. Under law, also, the dividend is paid out of profits, reasonable dividend when there are profits. And if there aren't adequate profits, they don't need the dividend. Why are you paying them the dividend? It's okay not to have a dividend. It's risk capital after all. In the case of the workers, I said we'd already convinced our workers, and this is what bothered me. We'd had long, long discussions with our workers and their unions, and they accepted that this is right and fair, that if you're all part of the enterprise, when the enterprise is doing badly, then those things which are discretionary, we won't get. We'll work harder. Hopefully, also the environment changes, and then we'll get benefits the next time when things are better. I said, having convinced them, and they seem to be with us from their hearts, that this is an ethical decision that we have taken with respect to them. How can I go back to them and say, oh, but we decided to pay dividends to the investors? What have the investors sacrificed during this last year? Many of them don't even know where their money is parked. They may not even know it's a ticker symbol on the stock exchange that the company actually makes trucks. They may not even know that, which is true of investors in the stock exchange. They don't really know very often what their money is being used for. And I said, this can't be. So Sumant Mulkanko, the chairman, I called him and I said, I'm having an ethical problem here, a problem. I can't continue. He said, well, you better talk to Nani Palkhiwala. He's the person who is shepherding this decision through the board. Now, I got a shock. He just won the Kesavan Bharti case, and he is being celebrated all over the country. And how am I going to argue with him the rights of the workers against the rights of investors? But I must say, to the greatness of the man, he heard me so well, and he got my point that it was a matter of needs. Who needed it more? And he mentioned to me that many of the investors in the Tata enterprises certainly were old pensioners, old widows and pensioners. They needed the dividends for their regular incomes. And so to shut them out would be probably as hard as shutting out the workers who needed to the bonuses with which they were used to, which they're paying for their schools, education, children's education, and so on. So we had this tough decision. So what shall we do? So he found then a good solution, which was within the laws of the country and also honored the ethical principles that we're not coming out, whereby we didn't have to reverse the decision of giving a bonus to the workers, but we gave them, in consultation with them, some money directly to them in ways that they appreciated even more. Now, I don't need to explain the solution, but this is a say where, as responsible persons who must honor ethics and economics at the same time, we can find these solutions. But to ensure that the solutions are fair, all parties, especially those who are most vulnerable, must be heard. And hearing the workers then, and they applying their great ethics, I must say, so respected them. They appreciated the problem we were in, and they helped us to find a solution which was fair to our values and our responsibilities, and very fair to them, they felt too also. So I come back to, in the formulation of the new laws that we need for the environment, for trade, for intellectual property, and new laws of corporate management, we must listen, not just to eminent lawyers and eminent economists of what the laws should be, or like we're doing in the farm laws. We must listen to the people for whose sake the laws are really, for whose sake the laws are really. So it's the process of framing the laws which must change to make the world better for everyone. And this is again, I'm quoting from Chief Justice, I forget now this, Justice Chagla or Chief Justice Ramana. He says, after all, political consciousness, so I think this is Chief Justice Ramana to the Law Institute, Law University. After all, political consciousness and well-informed debates can steer the nation into a glorious future as envisioned by our Constitution. And he says, and well-informed debates. My question is, who is included in the debate? Whose voices are being heard? We can have very nice intellectual debates, and we do have them. But who is being heard in the debate? So the key point to my mind is learning to listen to people not like us. Learning to listen to people who have different histories, who have different beliefs possibly. We must learn to listen in our country to people who got different religions, different histories, like I said, different cultures, different languages. If we don't listen to each other and learn to understand each other and respect each other, we will not make our country the harmonious country that we wish it to be, and it needs to be, and the country that we envisaged in our glorious Constitution. Listen to each other laterally. And I talk about the power equation. The powerful must listen much more to the powerless. The rich must listen much more to the poor. Their knowledge is not poor. Their wisdom is not poor. They are just poor in money. They are poor in recognition. Give it to them and take the benefit of their wisdom. They understand resilience. They understand how to be a piece of a fragile economic and environmental system better than we do. Their ideas of the shape of the system, which will keep the environment going, the economy better, and the lives of all human beings better, are the frameworks of the solutions that we experts on the top need to have. So I come finally to conclude with my ethical question. The question, whose side are you on? Are you on your own side, which is what this economic dictum of the last century said? You must be responsible to yourself and for yourself, as a corporation, to your investors and for yourself, and as a human being, a rational, self-interested human being. Wrong. I don't want to be on my side. Do I want to be only on the side of powerful people who can pay me for my professional excellence, as Justice Ramana said, or Justice Chagla also, on the side of the people who can pay me the most? Why am I doing that? Because they are right? Or because they pay me more? I have to think now, why am I doing this? Or will I be always using my professional ability and my skills on behalf of the powerless? This was Gandhiji's reminder to all policymakers everywhere, that when you're thinking of a solution, a new policy, think of what effect it will first have and immediately have on the poorest person that you can see or think of. The principle of Anantodaya. That is, to my mind, an ethical principle that must be brought into those who govern every institution, whether it's a business institution, it's a nation, or those who would now be reframing the international governance systems, which I hope will be reframed on this ethical principle of think first of the effect of the new laws and the systems of governance on the lives of those who are at the moment most helpless. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for that very lucid and in-depth exposition on ethics, morality, and the concept of that inherent goodness, which is a rather vague concept, and its relevance to law, science, and institutions of the times that we live in. Now we have some questions for Mr. Arun Maira, and I have collated all those questions that have come up in the Google and the YouTube Q&A post. Interestingly, the first question is with respect to what you mentioned as the last regarding Mahatma Gandhi. The question goes like this, and it's by Mr. Anand, and he asks, so what do you think is the relevance of ethics propounded by Mahatma Gandhi, especially his civil disobedience call, which based itself on a duty to oppose law that was ethically wrong?
Thank you so much, Anand, for. I have been revisiting people who I had learned from by reading about them as I grew up. And Justice Thomas, you mentioned I was born on 15th of August 1943, but before the 15th of August 1947. And Mahatma Gandhi was a hero to most Indians, or had to be at that time. It helped us through very difficult times to finally come to the place where we could say we are responsible for ourselves and go away and let us make our own messes if we have to, but we will. And we created a constitution after that. And my mother, and father too, who were part of movements in those days before partition, and the freedom movements, um, would, you know, tell me what Gandhiji stood for. Well, I was even 3, 4, 5 years old. And when Gandhiji got, before he was assassinated, 2 days before he was assassinated, my mother took me to a prayer meeting where the meeting ended, people would rush up to get his blessings. And he would, say, let the children come first because, they're small. And so I was pushed. I was 4 years old, or not yet 4 years old at the time. Or I forget. I mean, very small. Forget me. Maybe I was 4 already. And he touched my head. He says something. And so my mother told me before she died 2, 3 years ago that remember Gandhiji always, and also remember that he touched your head, son. He touched your head. And so his ideas have influenced me, as been mentioned earlier by Justice Thomas, the ideas of the Buddha and Buddhism. And these are all ethical ideas, I would say. So what about Mahatma Gandhi's ideas have impressed me? One is, yes, this principle of Anantodhyaya. And he expressed that in his whole life. There are two other ideas. One I've been talking about, which is how do you change the shape of the economy and society so that it's more just. And let me say just 2 minutes about that. And the other is this matter about civil disobedience. And yes, Gandhiji was very influenced by Henry David Thoreau on Walden Pond, which I've read more than once and been to Walden Pond and seen his little hut, Thoreau's little hut too. What is your responsibility when things are going wrong? In what way are you entitled to express yourself? I talk about both these two things very quickly. Regarding changing the shape of the economy, Gandhiji and Schumacher both had expressed, and Schumacher with economics logic, and Gandhiji with both economics as well as socio-political logic, said that people must locally, in their own communities, manage the conditions of their community, their environment, and their society. And in that, they must give equal respect to all those who serve and live within that community. And the Dalits who live within the village, they provide a very valuable service. If they stopped working, we'd all die of disease, he said, within a day or two, a few days, because those days one was very vulnerable to gastrointestinal diseases, which can kill you very quickly if you get them. So he was very clear that everyone who performs a function, don't say who's higher or lower, we all perform functions which are necessary for everybody. So create communities with respect, and people respect each other, and as he always said also, respect the animals, respect the land, the soil, respect it. It gives you life. So he had these constructs of village governance, which is economist advisor J.C. Kumarappa, and his great books one should read too, which develop very good models of self-governance in our communities, in village communities. And today the world is coming back to saying, gosh, We've got to learn how to manage the commons. We can't leave the commons to be managed by rich people who come and own the place and then say, I'm going to provide you things that you seem to need. Let the people manage their own commons. They'll do it rather well, and they should learn to do it fairly, respecting each other. So this idea of Gandhiji's has become very relevant today. The other idea is civil disobedience, the idea of standing up with courage to stop evil. But while standing up to stop evil, do not violently cause harm. The whole idea of being able to be heard even though you're non-violent. This was the new thing that he taught the world, that you can create movements which are based on this principle, as Martin Luther King did in the civil disobedience movement in the United States. Honor the principle, but the exact form of the movement would depend on the conditions around you, the resources that you can muster, and what you have to stand against. So there's no template for a non-violent civil disobedience movement. The principles to remain. One is, what are you fighting for? If you're fighting for the rights of the people who are being deprived of rights by the powerful, it's a just cause. And fight that without causing harm, violent harm. Keep those two principles and be creative, be innovative. And so that's what he's also taught us. And today, I would say in some ways, the farmers of India for the last 1 year, there'll be the jury out saying maybe they did some violence or not, but it seems very largely that they didn't deliberately go and cause any harm to anybody. They even tried their best not to block the flows of traffic and so on. The police did have to block it for the sake of safety, but they didn't do it necessarily, the farmers themselves. And so we come to that we'll have to keep on standing up and finding non-violent ways to stand up. And in this, when we talk of movement, the word is people who are powerless can't do it alone. All the powerless people must be able to find that they have a common cause, and to get people to understand the common cause that would be the same cause, whether you're fighting for the rights of women, or fighting for the rights of the Dalits, or fighting for the rights of poor farmers. This was the right to, if you will, my right to exist, my freedom to determine politically my future, my right to have equal opportunity in the economy, and my equal right to dignity. So there were these three freedoms that Gandhiji had put out, which are in our constitution. It's not just political freedom, the right to vote. It is the other two rights which everyone must have equally. And the change of society so that everyone has equal economic opportunities and rights, and everyone has equal rights as human beings to respect and dignity, which we're far away from. This is that. But you can come to times when people say, doesn't matter what our separate causes are, the cause of women or the cause of the environment. There's something really fundamental at this stage which will enable us to come out and say, just stop the way you're doing it. Stop imposing things on us. It is our right also to determine how things should be done. So that's the fundamental right, to be heard, to be listened to be included in the governance. So these are the insights that I have from Gandhiji about his principles, as also his lessons to us about the architecture or methods.
Thank you, sir. The next question is from Sharat, and incidentally, he touches upon the tragedy of commons principle that you mentioned in your address. He asks, uh, do you think that the tragedy of commons played out in India with full force in such a way that it led to not only the destroying and destruction of the environment, but also the public interest in general? I think his question is rather on the question of whether the tragedy of commons principle had played out in India so as to cause a devastation.
Yes, of course. I mean, the tragedy of commons principle has been playing out all over the world. But I want to make a very good point, which you have, I think, wanting me to make, perhaps, is that, this idea of the tragedy of the commons became driving the designs of economic enterprises. And yes, Hardin and his views. In 2009, was it 2008? After 62 men had won the Nobel Prize in economics, at long last, a woman won the Nobel Prize in economics. Her name was Rena Ostrom, and she won it for showing that people can manage their commons very well and have been doing it all over the world. And in fact, much of her research was done in India. She found how people in India, the poorer people, were managing their waters, their grazing lands, and in the forest, the tribal people managing commons very well. So the tragedy for India is that something that we knew how to do well, we were being told that's backward. You see, this is all tribal stuff and village stuff. No, this modern stuff is in big corporations. We run on the principles of the tragedy of the commons. Have more of this. And of course, we started to get the tragedy of our commons being taken over by corporations from the East India Company. It was a corporation created in the United Kingdom of investors, provided limited liability that they could put their money for these ventures into India and to the Far East, in which their managers did what they felt like to make more money, and what the governors did in London was to ensure that all the money was received by them, the profits were received by them, and then fairly distributed amongst the investors according to the proportion of what they invested. That's the origin of, I would say, some fundamental principle of corporate governance has become. And these people didn't care. The managers, I mean, sorry, the governors didn't know even what Robert Clive was doing in India and how he was making the money for the East India Company. And of course, how it harmed Robert Clive and Warren Hastings, how they harmed the lives of people in India, and took over um, our fields to grow the crops that they wanted, which was indigo and then poppies for the opium trade. I mean, they were converting our commons into the property of their businesses. And that has destroyed social life, it has destroyed the environment. And so, yes, we've had a double whammy with the tragedy of the commons idea being imposed on people who understand that we have to live together. We are different people, and that's how we must live. And we have lived very well, actually.
Thank you, Justice Jayashankaran Nambiar. I can see he has unmuted himself, so he has a question for you.
Yes, Mr. Maira, it was essentially just pointing out to what you just said, because the other question was raised about the tragedy of commons, and you did mention Eleanor Ostrom, the 2009 Nobel laureate in economics. A book on governing the commons is basically what you were suggesting, and in fact, you're absolutely spot on, right? That this was something that was always within the knowledge of the Indians, and the whole the reason why Mahatma Gandhi actually wanted the the local self-government system to be enshrined into our constitution at the time of its making itself in 1950 was this. But it was interesting what much of what you said today in the course of your talk resonated with the Ubuntu philosophy, which informs the the South African Constitution today, the new South African Constitution. And I was just thinking, in the context of what you said with regard to the paradigm shift that we must undertake in our dispensation of justice, not only from the courts but also from the other bodies or functionaries under the constitution, who also, in my opinion, have a role to play in the access to justice guaranteed to the citizens. How practical is it to hope for that kind of change in a society or in a system or a society governed by a legal system which is fundamentally rights based? We our own ancient Indian legal system was entirely built upon the concept of dharma, which translates into duty. And yet, in 1947, when we got our independence, and then after that, when we adopted the constitution, we find that we retained the Anglo-Saxon or the British system of rights-based legal system. curiously, we have the fundamental duties coming in as a separate chapter in our constitution much later, which is about 25 years later. And I don't know whether you stumbled upon there was a nice piece in the editorial in Hindu today by Advocate Suhrit Parsad, who was talking about the same thing. And although, I mean, I don't, accept much of what he said, but it's very well articulated. He talks about duties under the Constitution, the concept of duty being as, aligned or as opposed to rights. And that is the limited understanding of duty that our Constitution actually wants us to embrace. I would think that it goes a little further than that, and we really don't have a choice as long as we have a rights-based legal system, and that unless we actually, now that we have a chapter of fundamental duties in our Constitution, which we still have not made it justiciable in courts. I've often wondered why, in the last 50 years or so, after the chapter was introduced, we don't go the whole hog and say that these fundamental duties are now to be justiciable or enforceable in a court of law. If we do that, probably much of what you're suggesting and much of what you're advocating would translate into reality, despite the existence of a rights-based legal system. I just wanted to ask.
You're so right and spot on. Yes, we got our constitution ideas from Britain, and the British constitutional ideas in terms of rights. I mean, maybe a parliamentary system, and the French might have a presidential system, and the US similarly. But the basic structures of those constitutions with respect to protecting property rights vis-a-vis human rights are similar, are very similar. And I've been reading in the last few weeks now the histories of constitutions, and recognizing that the idea of property rights, and then who has a right to frame the constitution, the Constitutional Assembly, is an interesting one. Now, how did the Constitution come about? Who was there in the discussion, and where did they get their ideas from? And I wouldn't take the time here to talk about, Catherine the Great's attempt to form a constitution for Russia 2 centuries ago, and how she went about it, and how in Sweden they formed their constitutions a century before that, and then modified them later, and the French and so on. So it's very interesting, the story of how the constitution comes about. And in that, these 2 points are very important. One is who is in that discussion. And second is, where do their ideas come from? And in our case, yes, we did have a fairly representative constituent assembly, maybe not enough, but it was fairly wide. But the ideas came from, well, our lawyers, including Ambedkar, which system were they most familiar with, right? And they honored, and they were trained in it. And so the time has come to say that whole structure of governance, which is in the Western constitutional system, which is causing the problem in the world, the problem both ways, causing the problem of inclusion of people in the governance, as well as, because of the emphasis on property rights and commons, the destruction of the environment comes through that way. And so I would like to come to Ubuntu, which you said. And with that, I want to talk about science. We talked about the ethics of science, which is part of the discussion. That Ubuntu is that, I exist because others exist. I exist because of you. And we say all life and human life exists because the earth exists, right? The planet and nature exists. So I exist because you and things around me exist, which is the Buddhist idea. Now, if we start with this is a different view of reality than the scientist's view, which is, well, there's something objective out there, outside me, about which I can get the data and make a model of it. And then I can very cleverly determine how to redesign this thing so that it performs more efficiently, produces greater output, which is how, we engineers or even economic policymakers view our role in the world. That I'm superior to this thing. I understand this thing. I'm the expert in it. I'm going to design it, and out of that derive the policies or the laws come out of it. But I'm not seeing that I'm actually a humble part within the system. that my ideas have also come from that system, the very system I wish to change. So to be respectful that I am a creature of that system and I can't suddenly determine to play God and to say, I understand it and I have been given the right to redesign it. I haven't been given the right by nature to redesign nature, and I am not God and I cannot understand it. And that's where physics comes. Physicists a century ago realized that as human beings with our human minds, which are embodied in a human body, it's impossible to understand certain things which cannot be translatable, felt and translatable into the human mind. And so, therefore, Einstein and Bohr and others in the world of quantum physics came into these concepts of uncertainty, of relativity, of unknowability. Unknowability. We carry on to say, oh, if I had more data, I could understand it. It's not a matter about the data. It's a conceptual problem. It's a paradigm problem, as you said. And I think, therefore, policymakers, economists, engineers need to be far more humble and not take on themselves this arrogance that I can design the system and make it better for everybody. It comes and backfires on yourself, and then you get removed from power because people don't trust you anymore. So you didn't get it right. It's happening right now with COVID. The scientists who've been recommending the solutions, whether they have a virus, have a vaccine, and which vaccine, people don't trust them. You see, we implemented lockdowns and look what's happening to our lives overall. So you've got a very narrow view on what life is about. You're trying to stop us from virus, but you're dying of many other things. So your expertise is very narrow. You don't understand life fully, what we need for life. When it comes to want to be humble, I'm because of the rest.
Correct. And Justice Albie Sachs has written a book on his life experiences, and in that book, which is called The Strange Alchemy of Life and Law, Justice Albie Sachs of the Constitutional Court of South Africa, who was instrumental in bringing about the new constitution as well. Beautifully captures the essence of the Ubuntu philosophy and how it was actually used for drafting the new constitution.
Yeah, I read excerpts of that book or parts of it. It really is beautiful. Yes. But again, in his book, as you know, you can see his struggle. He
Yeah,
may believe this, but others around who have ideas about, how to make it effective, they take ideas from evidence elsewhere what is effective. And so, yeah,
correct.
it gets compromised.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I have a couple of questions again. I think that we have run out of time already. But if you permit me, I can take one more question from Mr. John Matthew. Do I have your
Sure,
permission?
sure, please, yes.
Sorry. Mr. John Matthew asks, the new scorecards suggested by you, which should not be based on singularly on GDP, is quite attractive. But do you think that the Indian constitution and the legal system as it stands now is capable of absorbing the changes in ethical principles that you pointed out in your lecture?
Uh, I think that, the forming of a scorecard, the Constitution provides us enough guidance that we must develop a new scorecard, actually. So that's Constitution not coming in the way of developing a new scorecard. The development of the new scorecard really is to do with business people and economists. They must be cajoled to accept that, like business people, that your business must be measured on more than your economic surpluses. And so, I've been part of the movement in India and wrote the book Transforming Capitalism on that basis of getting business people to voluntarily accept that they must measure their goodness of their business on a broader scorecard. Even if society is not measuring them by that scorecard, they should measure themselves by that. And fortunately, I had the benefit of growing up with Tatas after my physics and learning management from the great leaders of Tatas. And J.R.D. Tata and Suman Mulgaonkar and Nani Palkhiwala would constantly be evaluating our enterprise, not merely by how much profit we made, which the analysts would be comparing us and saying Tata is not a very good company because it's a socialist company, it's not a capitalist company. But they had these values, which we will say are like socialist values, and they would keep measuring how well we were doing for India, for the environment of India and the people of India. So I had this thing to say, why don't larger gatherings of business people accept that business generally will use this as scorecards for themselves and compare with each other and learn from each other how to be more responsible corporate citizens. But I found it very hard. They found it very hard for the reason that amongst them, naturally, is a process of change. Many of them who were admired for their ruthless pursuit of profit and therefore able to get more money and grow even further, didn't want to be compared with those who are, looking after the whole environment and not doing so well money-wise. And this was happening. So there were people who were given sort of awards for CSR, which they did. Some built a good hospital somewhere to look after people who got cancer, whereas they are polluting the waters through their mining operations, and therefore people are getting cancer. So one side you're causing the cancer in big ways, and then using a little bit of money to build a hospital and being admired for it. They wanted to be respected for what they did, which was wrong and unethical. So it was very hard to get a voluntary acceptance that everybody will adopt this. So it came to the point where some business leaders in India requested the Ministry for Corporate Affairs to bless these corporate voluntary guidelines that they had made and said that the government is endorsing them and would admire companies who are using these guidelines and perform well by these guidelines. And in further discussions about what should be the corporate laws, these companies will be given precedence and invited first. Now, this is a very sensible idea of how to make a movement. It didn't go far. Why? For two reasons. One, like I mentioned, that some companies naturally would resist this change. And the other was the economics. Economists began to say, oh, from the Chicago school and here in India through the Washington Consensus, no, life should be made easy for business. Because if business grows, everybody's benefited. By some invisible hand, the trickle down will happen, everybody will benefit it. So any of these socialist ideas that were part of, let me say, the socialist world of the Soviet Union, which the West had defeated, should not be allowed to come in. Business should be only about business. So because the combination of these two things, that thing was set aside. So we come to the point again, we may have to, at least for business, get more pressure, some movements which are happening, but they may have to be supplemented by teeth in the law, to say that businesses must report to all stakeholders, not just to their investor stakeholders, for which SEBI is a very good governance mechanism. But what is about the governance of businesses through other regulators? That has to be strengthened.
Thank you very much, Mr. Maira. Even though we would like this discussion to continue and take it further, we are seriously short of time. And we hope that we can have a sequel to this and a second part to this where we can take this discussion forward. Kindly permit me to propose the vote of thanks. And on behalf of the Indian Law Institute Kerala State Unit, I express our profound gratitude to Mr. Arun Maira for agreeing to address us on a topic of great contemporary relevance to our law and our legal system. I thank Justice Alexander Thomas, the Executive Chairman of ILI Kerala, and Mr. Jayashankaran Nambia, Member of the Executive Council of ILI Kerala, for addressing us online. On behalf of ILI Kerala, I thank all the Honorable Judges of the High Court of Kerala, judicial officers across the state, mediators, advocates, and all those faculty members from different universities and law colleges who have joined us, especially the law students who are here with us. And also, I should thank the LiveLaw for all the technical support that they have given to us. Thank you very much, sir. And we look forward to meet you again on the same platform. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.